Hello, and welcome to something that I have wanted to do for a while, and something I realised that I hadn't done. So I was avoiding doing it because I was like, well, I've done it before. Been putting off making best of lists because mainly what I've been doing is just been doing like best of the year, because I've been gone for so long. Like, I dip in and just do a big best of thing. And so as a result, I was kind of like, well, I don't want to do a best of thing because I don't know. I felt like I was doing too many. But looking at it, the only top list I've ever done in terms of that isn't like time specific of like this year, etc., just an all-time thing, is I did a top 5 best fantasy series list. And that, I think that's like almost 2 years old now. I'm due this, I'm going to allow myself this, and we're going to do a top 10 fantasy books of all time. 1 entry per series, 1 entry per author, to get as many people on here as we can. I had a lot of fun putting this together. I don't think there's anything that's going to blow someone's mind. It's not like I've got anything here that people haven't heard of, is going to be outlandish. Sometimes series and books are as famous as they are because they're that fucking good, okay? That's just the way the cookie crumbles. I have given myself that the month that I am in of July, the book does not count towards it, because the spear cuts through water would be fighting to get on there without a shadow of a doubt. But I decided that I don't want the recency bias knocking things around. So it's disqualified, but just know that it would definitely be fighting around it, to say the least. So consider that your honourable mention. Spear that cuts through water. But without further ado, if you do enjoy these videos, I am going to probably do a top 10 fantasy, which I definitely am. We are doing it right now, I hope. Then I'm going to do a top 10 classics, and I'm going to do a top 5 science fiction. They're my plans, and then I'm going to do a top 25 books of all time, regardless of genre, everything. That's what I'm going to do. They're the lists that I've got planned. Hope you support me in doing that. Hope you provide me with some suggestions. Number 10, The Lions of Al-Rassan by Guy Gavriel Kay. Now, this is the one that has the closest recency bias for me. I read this a couple of months ago, and I did thoroughly love it. I gave it 4.5, but it's one that I think is a 4.5 in the reading experience. It's 5-star in terms of the things that I will keep with me, and the more I think about it, the more I love the book. So this is essentially a fantastical retelling of like 9th century, 10th century, I think, if I'm just off the top of my head, medieval Spain. And specifically the relationship between what is a kind of fantastical version of Christians, Muslims and Jewish people during that time period of the kind of, I think it's called the Reconquista. I feel like my brain is just rotted, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And it was when the Christians reclaimed that peninsula. I learned that that's called the Iberian Peninsula because Grace read a book. So I'm going to pretend I'm really clever. And it's when the Christians reclaimed the Iberian Peninsula. So we're following 3 main characters of each ethnicity, each religion within this book. You're following Rodrigo Belmonte, who is a kind of soldier of fortune, someone who is expelled from his land and becomes someone for hire, for some reason, a mercenary. He is a mercenary group. And so you're following him, you're following Kairan, who is someone, a poet turned assassin, has also been expelled. And finally, Johan, who is a doctor, who is of the Jewish race within this book. Yeah, is a physician. And all of those 3 characters come together, and the story is about how they exist with their differences, their cultural differences, the shared experiences, how religion overlaps, how it brings people together, how it pulls people apart. It is a beautiful story, a tragically beautiful story. How people that view themselves as different than each other, if they just spend time together in a way that is not combative, find shared experiences and can grow to love and appreciate each other. And how the beauty of those relationships, honestly, is the fundamental point of the book. I loved it for its themes. I think it has beautiful writing. It does have a tendency towards cringe sex writing, very man writing woman. Well, no, man writing sex, I would say more. I would say that's the main problem I have with it. It's a very experiential book. It's not heavily plot driven. It's very character focused in terms of the relationships and how they build and grow. So if that's your vibe, then it is so good. Next up is Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee, a book that I read 2 years ago now, which is nuts. An absolute classic of modern fantasy. It is the third book in the trilogy, the Greenbone Saga, so it's not something I can go into particularly, but to give you the kind of explanation of why this book resonates so much is because you've followed characters for a certain amount of time now. The first book spans a very short amount of time. The second one spans just a bit longer, a few years. I think it's like 6 years or something. And then this one spans decades. Some people don't enjoy the fact that it kind of skips through parts and kind of skips through time. And I understand why that wouldn't work for people. But for me personally, it was kind of... I never felt that that wasn't the journey that we were always going to take once you get to that second book. You kind of get the fact that this is a family saga. And so the multi-generational element is something that always works for me. Multi-generational stories, just they pull me in because you have a connection to those characters and you watch them grow, and it's such a simple way of being able to completely resonate with the audience as an adult, because you show them when they're young, you grow them up, and you have someone younger do the exact same thing to them. You get to watch how certain characters, when they've grown up, how those that follow have absorbed or deflected influences from those people. It's such a brilliant, if it's nailed properly, it provides an extra level of depth that is just incredible. And so that's what this does. I still think it's an incredibly inventive world in terms of modern set like fantasy, like the use of guns, everything like that. The magic system is so interesting. I think that there's a lot of complicated and, well, complex character play at work in terms of morally grey. There's not a good guy or a bad guy. It is very complex in terms of the motivations, the justifications of characters, and it makes you root for people that you know are completely in the wrong. Being able to do that while I'm consciously aware that if they existed and I knew them in real life, I would detest them. Being able to manage something like that is incredibly impressive. So, Jade Legacy, right there. At number 8 is Memories of Ice by Stephen Erickson, book 3 in Malazan Book of the Fallen. It was so hard to pick a particular book from this series, honestly. I've now read 7, and there are things from each book that I can think of that I would say have elements that would be the best in the series. They're so comparable in quality. I have not experienced a dip so far, personally. Bone Hunters would have to be close. The ending of Dead House Gates may be one of the single greatest things in fantasy. But personally, I think the reason that Memories of Ice stands out for me is because you return to the characters from book 1. And as a result, it provides like a kind of a signpost within the series for you to latch onto and go, okay, this is where we're going. And yeah, some of the reveals in this book, the character work, the expansion you do on the world building, the magic, everything like that. I've said it before, I'll say it again, because I've been reading Malazan for over 2 years now. Probably close to 3. It is epic in scope in a way that epic does not do justice. Because when you think of epic fantasy, and it's kind of, you think about it in a way that I don't know, it feels like it's a fantasy book. This truly feels like I am reading a different world's texts. Like, that is genuinely how I feel. I read this and I do not associate anything with our world in the slightest, apart from human experience. Erickson does such an amazing job of relaying human experience in a completely foreign world that I don't think anyone else has even come close to, honestly. Yeah. It's... Malausen is unlike anything else, and it only is there because it struggles due to the fact that everything is such a comparable level of quality that nothing stands out. And sometimes that's like a deficit in this case, because it deserves to be at the highest it could be. Number 7 is right here. It's this little lady. Going Postal by Terry Pratchett. Sir Terry Pratchett. Talk about a whiplash to the ones that preceded it. Going Postal is a book that shaped me. It is a book that I adore wholeheartedly. And I think it is still, I have recommended it to a lot of people, and I've seen people change their minds to it. I have seen Daniel Green now say that he recommends it as the starting place. I've seen a lot of people come around to the idea, and I'm not saying that that was due to me. I very much understand that it wasn't. What I'm saying is, I'm glad that other people are reading it and are coming to the same conclusion. That Going Postal is the perfect starting place. Because it's funny. It's the most probably consistently funny Discworld book that I've read personally. From the opening scene where Moist von Lipwig is going to be hanged, and he's having a conversation with the hangman, and he's talking like, why do we do this? Because, I mean, is it really deterring people from crime? Because I'm here, like, we're still doing this. Surely if it was a deterrent, we wouldn't need to do it anymore. And the hangman's like, that's a very valid point, honestly, because, you know, at what point do people just, people are so desperate that they won't care about the consequences, and so is it really worth taking a life for that, or should we find a different way? And Moist von Lipwig's trying to talk his way out of it. It's such a perfect introduction to his character as a con man, someone who's so talkative and can worm his way around people. And there's just the great line from the hangman where he goes, well, I can tell you one thing, never had the same person up here twice. And that is one of the best jokes in anything I've ever read. And it just stays that high. The book follows Moist von Lipwig, one of the greatest names in fantasy, as he is put in charge of Ankh-Morpork's post office, a decaying, decrepit, out-of-fashion type of communication transportation due to the invention of clacks, something that can be sent via massive radio towers, and yeah, the post office has become obsolete. So he is given the job of die or do this, and so he chooses to do this. And yeah, the book follows him creating the post office, and it's one of the most quintessentially British books I've ever read. It's one of the funniest books I've ever read. I've read it twice now. I loved it just as much, if not more, the second time round. It has just so many quotable lines. Stanley, there's a great scene where Stanley goes into the pin shop because he's a pinhead, and he finds a magazine in the back that has it has a woman in a leather outfit, and he's pointing out the fact that is that really appropriate, and the guy behind the counter goes, well, look what's in between her teeth, or I think it's her fingers or something. It's a pin. And there's the idea of like, he keeps nails out back because there are children, or like their children come in here. It's so good. God bless it. I know that's probably, people are hearing that and just being like, what are you talking about? But trust me, it's goated. Next up, at number, is that 6? I think that's 6. A redemption for me, personally, not the book, for me. I read The Light of Lochlamora, probably going on 2 years ago now, 2.5 years, and I gave it like just under a 4, and I enjoyed it. Like, I thought it was a really good book, but I didn't love it, and I didn't really have any interest in reading the second book, And then I got reached out to by Murphy Napier, who was kind of like, would you like to discuss the first book? So I was like, well, if we're going to, which I would love to, I need to reread it. And so it eventually became a buddy read with Grace, myself, Murphy and Bryce, where we were all, I'll leave, oh God, Grace would not be happy if I heard that book. It'll all be in the description, but we buddy read these books, and Red Seas Under Red Skies is phenomenal. I loved it. I loved everything about it. It's my favourite one out of the three. It's the second book in the series, Gentlemen Bastards, and I really still love Lies of Locke Lamora, but I didn't get why everyone loved it so much until I read this one. And I tend to be a second book girly in terms of trilogies, which at the moment this is. You know, it's going to be more, but right now the second book is the middle of the three. That is good math. And it's impossible to go into the plot of this because it kind of inherently spoils the first book, so I'm not going to. But let's just say that we're following Locke, who is a thief and a con man. Everything that is set up in the first book is expounded on in terms of the central relationships in this novel completely hit and elevate everything that came before. There is depth added to Locke as a character, definitely a lot of depth added. There are mysteries answered and mysteries developed. I can't really say why because it's an inherent spoiler, but Gentlemen Bastards is a classic for a reason. Number 5 needs no introduction on this channel, I hope, because I have read the whole series twice now, and I don't know where it is. Yeah. This one is too hard to pick a book out of it, and that is The Long Price Quartet. It's between the last two, and Autumn War or The Price of Spring are still two that they just fight relentlessly between themselves because they are inherently in communication with each other. I kind of treat them as one book because the consequences of one are directly felt in the other. Yeah, they're fundamentally fused in my opinion. The work done in this series is exceptional. Truly, truly exceptional. Because each book spans like a decade gap between each entry. And so by the time you come to the third and fourth book, the characters that you were with as young men, as young women, as young people, they have now aged. Once again, like Jade Legacy, they are now aged people with children, and as a result, the intergenerational play, the inherent trauma, the trying to redeem yourself for past actions, all of these things are done to perfection. Daniel Abraham is amazing at creating what this world in particular is so good at being described in so little words. It inherently draws on images that you can connect to but feel fantastical, and it requires so little signposting to explain world building, and as a result, the magic system, the concept of poets, amazing. I'm not going to explain it because the books kind of organically feed you that information. But the magic system is astounding. I love what it does with language. I love what it does. I love what it does with evocative things such as the descriptions of weather. You feel cold, you feel hot, you feel all these things. The description of food, all of that. The character relationships, the feelings of duty, the themes of loss, sacrifice, complete despair, grief. Shame is a massive one. Shame, the consequences of what's done to you as a child, generational trauma, all of it is compounded and just it's incredible. And yeah, the third and fourth book as a duo are incomparable. There are moments that give me chills still thinking about it, honestly. I think they made me cry so much, and I think they are astounding books. And that's why Daniel Abraham is one of my favourite authors, and Long Price Quartet was in that video of Best Fantasy Series. Next up is something I just reread. When I first read this, this was my favourite book of all time. This was my favourite book for a long time. Years. And it has been usurped. Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson is number 4. And it is number 4 by virtue of the fact that the 3 above it are exceptional and personal, and you know, that is a different ball game. These are my favourite fantasy books. I understand that it will be different for other people, but these are my top 10, and so as a result, personal experiences have to come into play, and Words of Radiance is still a perfect sequel. It takes everything that The Way of Kings does and once again develops it. I think one sacrifice that Way of Kings has to make is that there's so much to introduce that it is a lot slower and has a lot less plot going on. Whereas this gets to completely go just full sprint. The consequences of the first book are explored wonderfully. You get organic progression. The magic system is completely developed on, and it feels so rewarding. Honor's Dead, but we'll see. I'll see what I can do. Is one of the most quotable lines in fantasy, in just completely modern literature. The amount of people that if you say Honor's Dead, but I'll see what I can do, that will be like, oh, what? Cannot be underappreciated. I think that Sanderson's writing is a lot better in here. I definitely appreciate that because Way of Kings at the beginning did have some real teething issues for me. The Words of Radiance completely strikes that. Yeah, I don't need to say anything. Everyone's excited for book 5. I'm excited for book 5. I can't wait. Number 3 is one that I read this year. I read it in February, and by golly gosh, it deserves to be in the top 3. And that is The Trouble with Peace by Joe Abercrombie. A delight of a book. A complete joy. Talk about everything that Abercrombie is great at. Duplicitous characters, detestable characters, but weirdly endearing and lovable. A Little Hatred is a masterpiece in of itself. It has a perfect depiction of class struggles, a perfect description of the kind of conflicts that arise. It develops, and not only develops pre-existing characters, but also completely invests you in a new cast, almost completely new. All of your viewpoints are new characters, and all of the old characters are referred in relation to those new characters. They don't rely on those old characters at all. This book gets to completely throw you into the central conflict between 2 of the protagonists. And I will say that I think that is something that this book, this series especially, does better than anything else, is that there is a conflict between our protagonists, and us as the reader is sat in the middle of that, having to pick a side, go with the choices they make, resent them for what they do, love them for what they do, love hating them for what they do. All of that works, and you are even more invested because each action is having an opposite reaction on the other side. And yeah, Abercrombie does everything that he normally does in terms of character work. His prose is second to none. Once again, because we've got older characters, we get to see how they are impacting new characters. We get to see how they've grown. There is a scene in this book of one character who has existed since the first trilogy, and he has a speech that brought me to tears. An Abercrombie book brought me to tears. That's like antithetical. It's meant to make me laugh. What the fuck is this? But it was so beautiful. It was amazing in just this arc of a character. I read it mainly with my housemate and Grace, and so we were having all these conversations, and like every day we would just talk about something in this book with one of them, and it built this depth and it built this layering, and having those conversations was just amazing. And yeah, The Trouble with Peace, without a doubt, has to be in the top 3. Number 2 is something that it's hard to choose a best book from this series. I think there's several contenders, and as a result I'm going to choose the one that has the most personal resonation with me, and that is Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, first book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy. So anyone who knows me knows about the fact that Grace and I met via a read along that we did together, a buddy read of The Realm of the Elvenlings. We read that first trilogy together. Poor wee little Ben messaged Grace after seeing that she was going to read Assassin's Apprentice, and did a leap of faith and said, "Do you want to read it with me?" And then the rest is history. But I gave Assassin's Apprentice a 3.5, and I loved Royal Assassin, and I really enjoyed Assassin's Quest. But Ship of Magic, the first book in this different trilogy that changes to a third-person perspective, introduces this whole new cast of characters, has such strong themes to do with slavery, to do with feminism, to do with kind of womanly autonomy, to do with race, to do with all kinds of things. And it was so strong in those themes, and so strong in its world building, so strong in its characters. And I was reading it at my great aunt's, and I remember sitting there. I remember sitting there in her house, reading this book, and I remember just feeling emotional about how lucky I was to be sat there with those people, reading this book that I loved so much, doing university work that I was really enjoying at the time, and being able to talk to Grace about this book and record messages and listen to her thoughts and all of those things. I just remember feeling so joyous at that time. And this has a moment comparable to Words of Radiance to me, where there is a moment in Words of Radiance, it is the Honour's Dead, but I'll see what I can do, where, not to do with the emotion of the scene, but my connection to the storytelling and how perfect I thought it was leading me to that point was astounding. And Ship of Magic had a similar moment. There is a line in this book, and it completely hit me of like, this character's journey, this book, has been phenomenal. And yeah, that one had it punched hard. It's so good. You know me, I've spoken about Robin Hobb enough, and other books challenge it, because Fool's Errand is astounding. All of the Live Ship Traders is incredible. Fool's Errand has to be up there. Fool's Fate has to be up there. Fool's Assassin has to be up there. Assassin's Fate, the last 100 pages, was a heartbreaking experience. All of these have the position to be the best in the series. Royal Assassin has an argument, but Ship of Magic, for me, is the GOAT. It is the one that personally resonated with me the most, and yeah, read Robin Hobb. And finally, by certainly means not least, this is another book I've reread, and it has to be one of the best rereading experiences I've ever had, because I hadn't read it in a decade. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel rereading that series, and it not only lived up to expectation, lived up to memory, but it exceeded it, because in my head, A Song of Ice and Fire is one of the best fantasy series of all time. Doesn't need to be finished. It's that good. Especially the first 3 books. The way I view the series is that there are 2 arcs. The first 3 books are an arc. The third book ties up so many things set up in those first 2 books that personally I think you can just read those 3. The same you can read Gentleman Bastards and come to the end of it and go, holy fucking shit, that's one of the best things in fantasy I've ever read. And A Storm of Swords, the third book, there is a reason It doesn't need the TV show. You know, like, that's what I think. I read the books before watching the TV show, and it still had the exact same feeling for me. The book did not. The book series did not need the TV series to be as big as it is. The quality level is at such a height that I think it would be still one of the best fantasy series of all time without that. You know what I mean? I think it would be the Name of the Wind, that kind of vibe of something that, the same as like Gentleman Bastard, something that is still top of the game, but people aren't reading it as much because it doesn't have a next entry. I love Martin's writing. I love Martin describing food. I love Martin describing liveries and whatever the fuck they're called. I don't know how to pronounce it in real life. I love him describing cities and people and everything. He has a language around description that is so evocative, brings so many images to the mind, and his characters, second to none. Jaime Lannister, eat your fucking heart out. One of the best characters in fantasy, bar none. Loved rereading it, especially after the first 2 books, where I thought his arc happened way earlier, and reaching this book and being like, oh fuck, you're gonna do all that in a book. Like, that's how good this book is. So good that I thought there was another book. I read this book being like, what happens in A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons? Because everything I thought must have happened later, because so much happens, all happens in this book. Red Wedding, Purple Wedding, Jaime, all of this. You've got fucking Moondoor, all of these iconic, truly iconic. Like, one of those things would be enough to make this one of the most iconic books of all time in fantasy. Having all of those things in one book is truly incredible. I don't think people genuinely give A Storm of Swords enough credit. I don't think they give Martin enough credit. And I'm saying it here, I'm saying it now. If you're one of the people who's like, come on Martin, finish the books, I truly think you need to take a look in the mirror and splash yourself with some cold water, because I feel so incredibly bad sometimes. I know Martin does some stupid shit, like being like, I finished this much of the book and I'm doing this and I'm doing all these things, and that is naturally going to infuriate when he doesn't deliver. I wish he'd stop. I remember when he was like, I'm not going to put numbers down anymore. I'm not going to give a time frame. I'm not going to give like chapters done or anything. And then like fucking 6 months later, he's like, I'm this much through the Winter of Winter. I'm like, shut the fuck up, Martin. George, fuck off. Can you just shh for 5 seconds? Because you're driving everyone insane. But I understand that. But when people go after, and I count this for it, the only one I don't count it for is Rothers, and because Rothers fucked people over. That's the only difference I have. I think he should be held accountable for what he did. Otherwise, Lynch, Martin, when someone takes a large break from series because they need it, and when people go after George R. R. Martin all the time for like, why aren't you writing it? Why aren't you writing it? Come on, come on. I just want to shake them and be like, he's going to die one day, and all you did was harass him. You didn't spend your entire time congratulating him on a masterpiece, on several masterpieces, on creating one of the best fantasy worlds to ever exist. All of these incredible things, all these incredible characters, revolutionising fantasy on television, giving all of this, like, the amount of budget we now have in fantasy. I know that people are fucking it up, but the amount of budget that has been put into fantasy shows after Game of Thrones is all down to him and the work he created. And I think that George R. R. Martin I think there's going to be a lot of regret from people when he passes and people think, fuck, well, he was never going to finish it, and I spent the entire time harassing the guy online, rather than saying, you are one of the greatest fantasy writers to ever live, who has created, in my opinion, the greatest fantasy book to ever exist. And yeah, that's my spiel. I think George R. Martin needs to finish the Song of Ice and Fire. In my opinion, I have said this before, give it to Daniel Abraham. Daniel Abraham has worked closely with George R. Martin. Daniel Abraham has clearly the ability to work with someone else in writing, because he did, he's James S.A. Corey. He clearly has that ability, and I hope that George R. Martin changes his mind and decides that he is willing to give it to someone when he passes, and I hope that person's Daniel Abraham, because if there's someone who could deliver on it, I think it's him. And thank you, George, because I don't think enough people say that. You know, George R. Martin and George Lucas could have a hell of a conversation, honestly. And I'm one of those people that bullies George Lucas way too much, so I understand. But thank you very much for watching. What a weird note to end it on. But I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, please do like and subscribe. Let me know what your list would be, or anything you'd agree with me in, anything you'd disagree with me in. And as always, have a nice rest of your day.